Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
GG was able to do what David couldn't do and made Canelo give him the belt to prove he didn't want to fight. GGG did that because he was advised to, right? Tom Lawford didn't secretly work with Canelo, and that's where there was a disconnect. David Benavidez fans don't want to believe that he needed to stay in that position and force Canelo. They seem to believe that, oh, he wasn't going to get the fight anyway. You're right, he wasn't. And he was told to do what he did so that Canelo don't look bad. They was working with Canelo, they being PBC, the people that handle his career. Al needed Canelo, the Amazon deal. They just announced the new dates. They were not going to risk Canelo getting his ass beat before getting a true deal from Amazon Prime. He was a pawn, David and Canelo. Canelo was a pawn in Al's chessboard of getting more finances and extra dates from Amazon Prime, and David was a pawn in the Canelo pressure.
Getting his ass beat by who, Nestor? David Benavidez? David Benavidez, who couldn't stop or drop Caleb Plant where Trevor McCumbee could. Trevor at least knocked him down.
David didn't.
I think what Nestor isn't factoring into the equation when he evaluates, what happened or what didn't happen at 168 is whether or not it was healthy for David to keep making that weight. When he talks about David leaving 168, going up to 175,
Nestor says that he should have stayed at 168 and held his position. Perhaps he would have if he weren't busting at the seams.
For a perspective, David Benavidez first became a super middleweight champion way back there in 2017. He had already spent a long time in this division.
You can't expect that he's going to be able to make that weight forever. The real reason David moved up, it's not because Al told him to, it's because he couldn't make it healthy anymore.
I'm surprised Nestor didn't mention that. You're talking about a guy 6'3", walks around at least 200 and change.
He didn't move up just because Al told him to move up. He likely had to move up.
That's why I brought up the Triple G situation, because it's like, here you got a dude that can't even speak Spanish, can't barely speak in English, and he got your audience to connect with him better than you. That shit bananas, man. I would feel hurt. Devastated. It's like, how the hell did Triple G get shirts, Mexicans for Triple G? What about me? I'm out here repping the flag. I'm out here living the style, right? Because I'm fighting like a Mexican in that ring. I'm bringing violence. I'm bringing excitement. I'm bringing theatrics. I wear a mask. I mean, were you there for Earl Spence and Mikey? Because if you was, you seen how that fucking crowd reacted to El Bandera Roja coming out before them. I don't know where the disconnect is at. It has to be that he's such a threat to the Mexican legend in Canelo that they're forcing themselves not to make him relevant long enough for Canelo to retire, and then they'll adapt him.
Nestor Gibbs wonders why more Mexican fight fans haven't taken to David Benavidez. He's got his own theories. Mine is a lot more simple. David's not Mexican.
Not just.
I mean, he's not a Mexican national, like Canelo is a Mexican national, or Jaime Munguia is a Mexican national, Isaac Cruz is a Mexican national.
David isn't. David wasn't born there.
Well, neither was Gennady Golovkin, but a lot of Mexican fight fans liked him.
Okay then, look at those two fighters. What did Gennady do that David didn't?
What separates them? What separates Gennady Golovkin from David Benavidez that so many Mexican fight fans gravitated towards him, where they don't really seem to gravitate towards David that much?
Here you got a dude that can't even speak Spanish, can't barely speak in English, and he got your audience to connect with him better than you. That shit bananas, man. I would feel hurt.
So one thing that Gennady did do that David didn't do is Gennady unified, and the whole time he was at middleweight, he was trying to unify. That became his gimmick, so to speak.
I don't mean that in a bad way.
Circa 2015, 2016, hashtag all the belts. Gennady Golovkin spent years trying to unify the middleweight division, but he was avoided.
By Felix Sturm, by Peter Quillen,
by Billy Joe Saunders for a while. Eventually, Billy started advocating for the fight, but by then it was too late. By then, it was all about Canelo.
Stick to the point.
One thing that Gennady did do, that David didn't do, was he was in pursuit of unifications for a very long time.
And eventually, he did unify. David didn't.
Just feel like Al gets everybody the big fight. It's unfortunate because David's about to be Al's first smudge on his resume. Like, Al's gotten Al got
Smudge?
He's dropped the ball. I mean, it looks like Benavidez, where we are right now, it looks like Benavidez will never get the Canelo fight because he's moved up. You know, he didn't get him the Jaime fight. Like, his father's out here saying that they was in negotiations. You couldn't lock in the Jaime. You see Berlanga, I played the audio. He couldn't even get the big Berlanga fight he wanted. He's been failing him. He got him the Plant fight after Plant lost. Like, he was supposed to be unified with Plant. It was supposed to be him and Plant. They had a rivalry. Like, and that's another one. He got Plant the Canelo fight for over 10 mil.
Something you often hear me mention here on the channel is that David was there at super middleweight for at least 2.5 cycles of champions.
2.5.
He was there a long time, and he didn't unify with any of those fighters, any of those champions. He didn't even try to.
He was there for WBA champion George Groves, there for WBO champion Zurdo Ramirez.
He was there for James DeGale, which subsequently became Jose Uzcategui.
Some of these champions were on other sides of the street.
In the spirit of transparency, Zurdo was over there at Top Rank.
George Groves went into the World Boxing Super Series.
James DeGale, in spite of being IBF champion, he was on his way out. So, you're not going to work with Top Rank on a Zurdo Ramirez fight. You're not going to send your unbeaten guy to some European outfits tournament in the World Boxing Super Series. Thus, the least you could have did was feed James DeGale to David Benavidez.
Could have done that. But that's just one cycle. In the next cycle, the WBA title goes from George Groves to Callum Smith. The WBO title goes from Zurdo Ramirez to Billy Joe after Zurdo vacated it to move up.
The IBF title went to Jose Uzcategui after James DeGale dropped it. I think it was to fight Chris Eubank.
And once again, David Benavidez didn't fight any of these people. He didn't unify with any of these guys.
The IBF title ends up changing hands one more time when Caleb Plant beats Jose Uzcategui for it.
At this time, both Caleb and David are unbeaten champions on the same side of the street.
That if you didn't want to deal with Eddie Hearn for a Callum Smith fight, or Frank Warren for a Billy Joe Saunders fight, you got another champion right there. You had another one in Caleb Plant, and you didn't make it.
What separates David Benavidez from Gennady Golovkin? Well, Gennady was trying to unify, and eventually he did, where David didn't.
Doesn't look like he was trying to either.
It's unfortunate because David's about to be Al's first smudge on his resume. Like,
I wouldn't say that David Benavidez is Al Haymon's first smudge. I mean, look at the Charlo brothers. Where are their careers? Did they go on to be stars?
No.
Did Keith Thurman? Did Rolly Romero? There's an itemized grocery list of names on the PBC side of things that Al didn't turn into stars.
To where I wouldn't call David Benavidez his first smudge.
David was there at super middleweight long enough that he should have at least had one unification match by now. That if Al, due to promotional and platform politics, didn't want to have to work with a Top Rank, or didn't want to have to work with a Matchroom or Queensbury, the IBF and WBC titles, all the while, they were both there, but he never put David in a unification match. And in 2019, I told you guys here on this channel.
I told you. When Canelo moved up to fight Kovalev, I told you he would beat him, but he's not going to stay up there. He's going to move back down. When he does, David needs to have already beaten Caleb Plant so that he can become the most dominant force at super middleweight.
The way these guys did it, they wanted to let the fight marinate. They wanted to let it build to the point to where David lost his title on the scales.
And instead of feeding Caleb to David, you fed him to Canelo. You let Canelo beat you to the punch to that fighter where you had a head start.
David and Caleb ideally were supposed to have fought when they were both champions. That would have been the ideal time to do that, circa 2019-2020.
During the pandemic?
Yes, either in 2019, before the pandemic, or in 2020, during the pandemic.
A unification match during the shutdown.
Yes, they could have done that. They did it for Jermel Charlo at 154. Don't you remember? When he unified with Jason Rosario, that was during the pandemic. That was in the bubble. If you did it for him, you could have did it for David and Caleb.
You guys chose to wait, and you ended up waiting too long.
Now, Caleb Plant just posted on the social medias that you said that David Benavidez versus Caleb Plant needs to take more time. Why?
Look, this business is for two reasons.
make money and more money. I'm pretty sure the Plant, he want more money as well as Benavidez. He need another 2 fights, 2 good fights, and then he can go to be a pay-per-view.
The obvious answer fans would say, well, we want the best fight in the best. We're tired of paying for C versus D. We want A versus A.
Well, you have 2 A's, no
That's
doubt.
what I mean, 2 A's and David Benavidez and Caleb Plant.
To see 2 A fighters, you need to pay. You cannot be for free.
They ended up waiting about 4 years to finally do the fight between Caleb and David. And by the time they did bill it as a pay-per-view, neither guy was a champion anymore. Neither guy had a belt, and the pay-per-view itself, it didn't sell anything. It didn't do anything at the box office, because if it did, well, David wouldn't be relegated to an undercard fighter on Gervonta Davis's undercard.
Where did it all go wrong?
Why did Mexican fight fans gravitate more towards Gennady Golovkin than they currently do with David Benavidez?
Gennady unified, and Gennady spent a long time trying to unify, where David didn't try to unify anything.
There were ample opportunities there, ample champions at the weight to go around, and Al Haymon did nothing to see his fighter become the most dominant force at super middleweight. He did absolutely nothing. Nada. Zippo. Zilch. Zero.
If you're going to surmise the job that Al Haymon has done so far, reflecting back on the past, you have to consider that. David was there for a long time, alongside a lot of champions, none of which he unified with.
So he was not at super middleweight what Gennady Golovkin became at middleweight. Gennady was considered the most dominant force in the middleweight division, where David was not considered the most dominant force at super middleweight. He was one among several champions.
So that when Canelo goes up to light heavyweight for a short while, beats a Sergey Kovalev and drops back down, David should have already been established. David by then should have already been the most dominant force at 168, but he wasn't.
So that the Johnny-come-latelys of the world can all of a sudden start blowing smoke up everybody's asses about this fighter that's done nothing of note.
You're just talking him up to tear Canelo down. I've read this book before.
I don't want the David versus David fight. I don't think David needs to be giving David an opportunity. David put in the work. The other David needs to go put in some fucking work. And he looked like dog shit in the fight that I thought he lost. I don't care if I'm alone in that fight. I'm good with that. If he didn't lose, and only I felt that way, what we all seen is extreme flaws. So many. He not ready for nobody. They need to develop him. And you're going to see that based off his next opponent.
In a situation like that, Al Haymon will have failed 2 fighters and not just one. If Nestor Gibbs is of the opinion that Al Haymon has already dropped the ball in David Benavidez's career for not getting him a big fight,
He will have also dropped the ball in David Morrell's career for not getting him a big fight.
that both David Benavidez and David Morrell will have campaigned in not just one division parallel to each other, but 2. Parallel to each other at 168, parallel to each other now at 175, and you're saying they shouldn't do it.
Because it needs to marinate even longer? It wouldn't be the first time that Al Haymon had 2 guys in the same division that need to fight but didn't fight. Like Leo Santa Cruz and Gary Russell, when they were both champions, like Jermel Charlo and Jarrett Hurd,
When they were both champions, like David Benavidez and Caleb Plant, when they were both champions, and now David Benavidez and David Morrell. You want to keep this trend going because you think David Morrell hasn't earned the David Benavidez fight. Well, there are a lot of people who think David Benavidez hasn't earned the Canelo fight.
that logic works both ways.
If you're going to use it, you don't just use it on the fighter that you like or the fighter that you're partial to. If what you're saying is that David Morrell has not done enough yet to earn a David Benavidez fight, well, David hasn't done anywhere near enough to earn a Canelo fight, if that's the case.
If you apply that logic.
Which I think is illogical because Nesta said, in all likelihood, David won't get the Canelo fight. Well, if you're not going to get that fight, what's wrong with this one?
What's the matter?
Thus, you will understand when I say that there's an active effort to put David Benavidez on a pedestal, and it's not working with some people. Not when you have to ask, why did Mexican fans gravitate more towards Gennady than they do towards David?
If you have to ask, Clearly something isn't right. Clearly something ain't working.
He isn't special just because he impressed you specifically. He isn't special just because you say he is.
He's not.
You're expecting that anybody who throws on a poncho and a mariachi hat for their ring walk is going to have all the Mexican fight fans behind them? David didn't put in the work. That's why they're not behind him. David didn't put in the work, and I think a lot of people learnt their lesson because a lot of those people that were backing Gennady Golovkin going into the Canelo fight.
They learned to respect Canelo Alvarez.
And I don't even think the first fight was a draw. I think Gennady won the first one and Canelo won the last 2 fights of the trilogy. But in that trilogy, I did learn to respect Canelo Alvarez, and I myself learned a lesson.
I'm not gonna slight him and downplay him. For the latest flavor of the month, you guys want to prop up.
The new shiny toy in the box that some have taken a liking to. No.
Sorry.
Seems nobody really cared about this guy until he became useful. A useful tool to talk down Canelo Alvarez, because before that, where was all the support? Where were all these people? He became a champion way back there in 2017.
He's had plenty of time to grow his brand.
And frankly, you're overestimating Al Haymon's ability to deliver the big fights and deliver for his fighters.
Eddie Hearn got more of his fighters a Canelo Alvarez fight than Al Haymon did.
Daniel Jacobs, Callum Smith, Billy Joe, Bivol, Berlanga, Ryder. Maybe it's Eddie Hearn's praises that you should be singing and not Al Haymon's.
Maybe.
I'm not against David getting the opportunity, and I actually hope that he gets it so he can be the latest PBC fighter that gets exposed. Because in case you haven't realized, when you get these guys on the big stages, the biggest stages of their career, they tend to flop. They tend to flounder. They tend to falter because they're not that good.
Like Wilder, like Spence.
Like Stephen Fulton. Oh, you haven't learned your lesson yet. You're not paying attention to the trend. And what usually happens in these situations, that you think David Benavidez is the big bad boogeyman.
Bandera Roja.
I notice a level of tribalism whenever Al Haymon and his PBC is brought up. His PBC fighters, they want the PBC to be a success, and they want these fighters to be the best fighters, the best in show, but they're not.
Trash.
Garbage. Match them tough, and you'll see if you haven't seen enough already.
Did you see what Agit Caballel did to Frankie Sanchez?
One of the PBC's unbeaten up-and-comers in the heavyweight division. I think what was the last gasp of their heavyweight stable. Keep trying to talk up these PBC guys, these PBC fighters.
David is basic.
Doesn't mean he's bad, but he certainly isn't special. Certainly isn't what you guys say he is.
So if he is who you guys say he is, why shouldn't he fight David Morrell? That should be an easy night at the office. That would actually be impressive. If he fought him and he beat him, knocked him out.
Because if you're at a point where you're asking, why aren't more Mexican fight fans supporting David? Clearly, something ain't working.
There's more work needs doing.